of Lone Grove, Iowa, because 93-year-old Bob Williams has been handing out extra large-size Hershey's bar for nearly 2 decades just to make people smile.
Introducing the Reese's Candy Converter. Instead of cash, you put your unwanted candy in there. The machine will swap it out for a Reese's instead.
If only there was a place nearby you could get one of these. Or these. Good thing they're sold literally everywhere business is done. I'm pretty sure you could buy them at a bank. Not sorry, Reese's.
Flip it and reverse it. Is your primitive and wet yet?
Hello everyone. I thought I'd cue a little sizzle video to get everyone a little bit excited and hungry. I should have brought some candy for you, but if I get your card afterwards, I'll ship you guys some of our candy afterwards. I'm so excited to be here for a couple of reasons. One, I'm relatively new to this space. As Steve said, my background has been really curated around the consumer, leveraging big data, and understanding what you can do with that information as you think about the journey a consumer goes along once they first are tapped and informed about your brand, all the way down to in-store when they purchase in retail. So thoroughly excited because of the diversity of the verticals that are represented here, as well as the diversity within the roles. So today I have the pleasure of taking you on a journey to understanding the mindset of a CPG, but then also transporting you into the home of Hershey. And so with that said, we'll kick it off with, I'm hailing from the sweetest place on earth, literally the sweetest place on earth. That is a picture of our home offices in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Show of hands. How many of you have been to Hershey, Pennsylvania? Oh my gosh, a lot of people, probably about half and half. Well, I really like this picture because it's the original offices / factory that started the company. So we're in our 125th year. So Steve said century-old company. We're 125 years old, and we're celebrating that this year. And we are the sweetest place on earth, literally, because we are located at the center of cocoa and Chocolate Avenue, right? And not only just because of that, but the streets of Chocolate Avenue are lined with kisses on the lights. They're so cute. So when I first moved to Hershey, Pennsylvania about 5 years ago, I thought this is such a charming place. But just when I thought that, oh my gosh, this experience is super, super duper sweet, and it couldn't get any sweeter, it did. So this is an aerial shot of why Hershey is the sweetest place on earth. And we really don't talk about it that much, but Milton Hershey, 125-year-old company, he was a risk taker, a serial entrepreneur, so innovation is just embedded within our DNA, right? But then there's this other half of Hershey's that you really don't hear about, and that's about the Milton Hershey School. How many of you guys familiar with that? So not many people. So back in the early 1900s, maybe about 1930s, Milton Hershey started a school for orphans because he and his wife couldn't have any children. So he wanted to leave behind this legacy, and it was like one of the best kept secrets because after he passed away, no one even knew that he set up our company in a way that we continually give back, like we're owned by the trust, that the school owns us. in so many ways. So every time you go out and you buy a Reese's or a Hershey bar, you're actually contributing to the school of kids who we completely 100% fund their education from ages 6 years old all the way up to 18 years old. Their education, their cultural experience, everything is 100% funded, and that's for over 2,000 children, boys and girls. So it's a great way for you to feel good about what you do, and like the things that I do every day, I'm like, sometimes it gets kind of, you know, you're reading a lot of data, you're doing a lot of work, but I feel really good because it's all contributing to the legacy. So, all right, so again, corner of chocolate and Avenue and cocoa. Anybody guess what this number is? Any takers?
Number of kisses sold per hour.
Oh, I don't know that. I don't know that stat, but that's a great guess. It's actually the number of people who live in Hershey, Pennsylvania. 14,000 people, and within our offices combined, like we have different satellite office, it's 2,000 people. So about 15% just on the people who work to make the chocolate. So while we are small, like it's a small town, I would definitely say that we are mighty, because 98% of US households make up the CMG or chocolate mint and gum category. So I'll let that pause. 14,000 people in the town of Hershey, but we make product that has the potential to go into almost 100% of US homes. So I feel, you know, I'm kind of beating on my chest on that one, like, hey, DTCs, hey, Dell, I just want to let you know you may have 30 years of first-party data, but I make product that has the potential to go in almost all homes, right? If I asked you to raise your hand, probably everyone would say I've probably had a chocolate before in my life. So what does that mean? That's 1% higher than the number of people who buy toilet tissue. I'll let that sink in. 1% higher than toilet tissue. I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. I'm going somewhere. I just wanted you guys to wake up this morning.
Thinking about the 3% that don't.
Like, yeah, what are they doing? They'd rather eat chocolate than to buy tissue. So that's 123 million households. That is 284 million, really 250 million if I take out like 18 or younger, right? 250 million people, billions of data, billions of basket level transactions that I have at my fingertips to analyze. Literally, yes, billions. And sometimes I can feel like I'm in the matrix of data, and essentially, I am Neo. I am the Neo of data. Hershey, analyzing chocolate at Hershey to understand how do I uncode all the data investments that we have made as a CPG, consumer packaged goods company. Someone told me, hey, remember to tell them what CPG is. Consumer packaged goods company, I am using all of our data investments from across the supply chain of marketing and insights to understand and uncode who the true consumer is, right? Because we don't have first-party data. All right, so my journey begins 2 years ago. So I've been in this role 2 years ago, and I first sat down, I told my director, look, I don't know anything about media. I'm kind of a insights hippie because I've rotated around the marketing funnel. And where do I start? Well, New York is only 3 hours away by train. So I thought, okay, well, let me sit down with the data companies who know it best. I mean, I sat down with our agencies, but then I also wanted to sit down with the walled gardens. I also wanted to sit down with the people who create the models, the data companies. So first thing happened was we create this beautifully pithy marketing description of who our consumer is. The no-dos, always goes hustler, right? So it looks really good on a storyboard and on a slide, and we say, hey, agency, please target no-dos, always goes. What does that look like? Okay, this is what he looks like. He is 18 to 34. He indulges in comedy videos and movies. It's very like prose-centric and storytelling-centric because it's written by marketing. And then I figured out, oh, well, within Google, there's 2 different ways to buy. You can buy on GP, Google Preferred, or you can buy in the auction, like, so you can have things optimized that way. We were buying 2 different audiences in the same platform for the same brand, could be Kit Kat. There were 2 different audience executions. And this is in my first month of being there because I asked for, hey, well, give me all the audiences because we have 17 brands and those brands have different priorities. And so I read what the audiences were, but then I went on site to YouTube and to Google and I understood, oh my gosh, we're targeting 2 different people, 18 to 34, 18 to 49. They had different mindsets, and guess what? The biggest gap was we didn't even target chocolate. We didn't even target our brand. We were targeting based on what we could do within the YouTube platform. So from there, in case you haven't noticed, one of my favorite movies is Matrix. So I figure like I give you a taste of who I am, but also take you down the journey of how we're building and targeting. So there's this really great moment, my favorite moment within the Matrix. How many of you guys have seen it? Okay, about half. Okay, so this might not land. So we'll see how this goes. So essentially there's 2 paths. You come to a fork in the road and there's 2 diverging paths. You can either take you could take the blue pill, which kind of you keep going, and I would describe it in the CPG world in plain language is status quo. It's like, okay, well I can make minor audience optimizations and keep going along this journey. Or you take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland and you keep going down this rabbit hole and you keep asking 1,000 questions and then you find out the root cause of your issues. And everyone knows what pill I took, right? Else I wouldn't be here. I took the red pill. Okay. Now, second question I asked, in the beginning, the first 3 months of my journey when I saw that we were targeting with 1 brand and we had 2 separate audience executions. Second question I asked, I said, well, what data is that coming from? What are we using to define always, like, no dose, always goes hustler? So then I started understanding the differences between first party, second party, third party data, and the biggest thing that I learned was this: quality, right? Like, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, but you guys get it. I was like, oh my God, we gotta have first party data. We got the parks. There's a way that we can grow that. You guys are familiar with Hershey Parks. Yeah, we have the potential to reach 98% consumers, and 300 million people do not come to the parks. So it wasn't scalable. So first-party data is in our purview, but it's not enough to get us to the next level. But I understood, like, this is the vision. Think like a DTC, act like a CPG. We have scale, but what does a DTC do? So as I started learning more about first-party data and what that means, the next thing is, another thing you need to know about me is, like, I'm a foodie and I also love analogies. So I thought, like, okay, we've got to get to this first party data, and it's kind of like my chicken has a first name, but it's like my data needs to have a first name. That's how I thought of first party data and where I wanted to take the Hershey company for all 17 of our brands. I'm like, how do I get there? All right, I said, okay, media agency, explain to me who does it best. Where do I learn? So I started reading articles about DTCs. I started talking to my friends who worked at DTCs to understand what are they doing with their data and how are they activating. And the best conversations came from one-on-one conversations or people that I already had established a personal relationship with. And so just to make sure you guys are still awake, I want to do something, try something here for a second. On the left side, you have a tail of a CPG or a DTC. But I want to ask you guys, which side do you believe is the CPG? So show of hands, who believes that the left side is the CPG side? Who believes the left side is the CPG side? Okay, right side. Who believes the right side is the CPG? Okay, 100% on your test. So just a couple quick things to ground us. For the DTC world, I thought, okay, there's a lot of things, best of both worlds, right? They're agile, they have an experiment mentality, right? So for me, operating in a CPG world on existing and old processes would take me a longer time to get to the right person if I operate within an existing framework. So I'm thinking I should be agile. The other part that I love about DTCs is you guys own the funnel. We don't own the funnel, we loan the funnel, right? Because they said in the video, Reese's are virtually sold everywhere. So we don't really own our data insights, and retailers aren't too keen on giving us their data, they rather sell us their data. The last thing, the common thread that I found between both of us is that we do have access to insights. Okay, so that was my anchor. The first concept that I want to introduce to this journey, this case study I've been on, is invoking this mindset of a farm-to-table mindset when it comes to your data. Now, what does that mean? Jeremy was just talking about this, having one singular source of truth. As a CPG company, we're sold in Walmart, we're sold in CVS, we're sold in Walgreens, and C-stores. And by the way, 60% of our volume comes from C-stores who are independent, and they don't share their data. So we're missing a big chunk of the story. So how do I operate in this highly proliferated environment when it comes to data and marketing insights? There's just one of me, there's 8 on my team, and there's 120 marketers, and then who knows how many agency partners and data partners I have, probably about 40. So I said, okay, no matter what we do, wherever we execute, we need to have a farm-to-table mindset. So where do we start? We start at the beginning with the planning process. And most of you, I've oversimplified this, and most of you who are in the CPG world, you probably have a planning and activation process when it comes to media. But the thing that I found out very quickly was it broke down in these 2 areas. If I couldn't get the farm-to-table mindset together unless I impacted the brief. And let me tell you how the brief was written, okay? Because we are a 125-year-old, very smart, very bright marketing company, but the media and the digital landscape has changed. So we were writing our briefs in Word documents, in PowerPoint, and we would say, and there would be prose, and it would be a paragraph. And then maybe 5 months later, that when it comes to campaign launch time, our agencies who've never really lived in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or who've never walked into a Walmart, who live in New York City, I don't mean to offend anyone in here who's hailing from New York, they would come time, hands on keyboard, click, 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 no does, always goes, hustler. What does that mean? Okay, they're a venture, they like concert tickets, they're coming to the table thinking, how do I get to this and interpret this beautifully written prose into a very real, addressable environment or a very real walled garden. And if anyone hasn't, I suggest you do, go onto some of your walled gardens platforms. Sometimes they allow you to actually, hands-on keyboard, build your audience. And this brings me to my second point with activation, why it broke down. So you have someone who's not necessarily connected to your business, is no fault of their own, because we need to scale. They're typing into the campaign planner, and what are the 2 biggest things that they see as they're building their audience? They're searching for keywords, but on the right-hand side is a top line of the audience size. On the bottom of the right-hand side is your CPM. So while we say we want to be consumer first and we have this beautifully written language, it's just the environment constrains you to constantly think about CPM, constantly think about your audience size. So there's nothing wrong with that. We just needed to adjust and pivot and adapt to the new environment so that we can continue to be consumer first like we've always been. Okay, show of hands. How many people have been in the planning process with your partner, or you yourself begins a conversation when you're planning with, what did we do last year? Okay, you guys are way brighter, way smarter than us, but like, it doesn't, when I say it out loud, you're like, well, why would you do that? Because the media environment changes, but we have these big scalable brands, and you're kind of fearful to move the needle, because it's like, okay, we put up good numbers last year, so therefore our mix can't really change or shift that much. And TV works really, really well for us. So that was a challenge and was a headwind for me. The second issue was, the second question actually that I get is, how big is my audience? And I'm like, I don't know, how big is your audience? Like, you know, I joke back with them, and like size does matter, but not necessarily in this environment. We have a diverse portfolio of products. I said we have 17 brands that have media, but we have over 80 brands that are sold in 70 countries. There's one of me, right? So I'm thinking, okay, we need to pull some business metrics up in here, because everyone can't be targeting 150 million people. So I looked at the household penetration of our brands and said, okay, Almond Joy, or okay, Bark Thins, if you have a X%, 10% penetration, then let's do some marketing math, back of the napkin math, and say, how many people realistically, addressably, should we be targeting? So that needs to be baked into your plan as a CPG, and it's, you don't have that first party data to say, realistically, if I'm gonna grow household penetration or grow X amount of sales, my audience needs to be right size. So that's one nugget that I found that helps along the process. So we had to blow up the process, right? Because things started to unravel very quickly. And I put a new lens on the planning process. What do I mean by that, right? In marketing, we call this, we have this saying that's called moment of truth. And so when we think about the consumer and every touch point that they interact with our brand, we call it a moment of truth. And so you have the 0 moment of truth, which happens really, it's not just digital, it could be linear TV, but it's when the consumer first becomes aware of your brand, right? You guys would call this the funnel, and it looks different depending on what vertical you're in. The first moment of truth is where you are seeing it at the shelf for the first time. And I've had the experience of leading consumer insights, global consumer insights, which helped me understand how do you nail the first moment of truth. The second moment of truth also was in consumer insights for innovation, is when the consumer gets home and they open the package and it does the product match with what the branding is saying. And third is ongoing CRM management. If you think about this, each moment of truth gives off data for you to analyze. But if you, again, 2 years ago, I came into the media space, and having worked in sales, I understood the first moment of truth at shelf. I was in category strategy and insights and worked for Kroger. I thoroughly understood that, and the data sets and toolkits. So I think Matthew talked about taking inventory of what data investments you have. That's hard to do when you're 125 years old and when you have a massive scalable company, right? So I thought about the consumer, and I thought about the different moments of truth and what are the data sets that help me analyze my business, but we become functional experts. The thing that got in the way, you guys know what this is a picture of, silos, right? Like you have your supply chain sit somewhere else, you have your sales people sit somewhere else, you have your consumer insights sit somewhere else, and they all communicate back to brand managers. Brand are the people who write the big ideas, who say no goes always on. Like they are the people who come up with the creative idea, and they run the business, they run the P&L, they push it forward. But then you have media experts who may not have any idea that we have data that already exists, but at different stages of the funnel. So all roads lead to the consumer, and this is kind of like something that I built to say, like, no matter where we're at, we need to be thinking about this cross-section of data. And the biggest aha that I brought in was like partner data, right? But then again, who realistically Googles, Alicia asked me this the other day, who realistically Googles Twizzlers? Like, when's the last time you ever searched for a Hershey candy? Maybe if you were buying from an e-commerce standpoint, right? But some of our walled gardens and some of our data partners actually have these consumer platforms that passively ingest insights about our consumers. So I thought, why not bring them into the matrix? So whatever data I could find about the baking consumer who's passionate, I want to bring that in to the fold. So people have seen this. This is a profile, right? This is just an example that I found on the open web. It's not Hershey's. We do not own this. It's just an example, illustrative example of how clean the consumer can look. But the reality is this is a picture of our new consumer within the walls of CPG. We are stitching together data points to tell a singular story about the consumer, because the consumer's mindset is super duper simple, but we overcomplicate it because we have these functional experts, consumer insights, we have category strategy and insights that touch the consumer, but the feedback doesn't all come to one place. So let's see. So here's what the new process kind of change looked like, right? This is a high-level view. But we're bringing in a cross-section of multiple data points along the consumer journey to understand what is that singular view. And there's two things that we have in our purview and in our rear view. I think, no one ever said we need more data. I actually never say we need more data. It's more about awareness and accessibility. And so from my journey down, I started in marketing at P&G. Then I moved to 8451 or dunnhumby. And then I moved to Hershey's, which I've kind of gone along this interesting journey around the consumer. And I knew that I had awareness, which changed my perspective. And I think that the marketer of the future and the insights person of the future kind of has to have that great cross-section of experience so that you can bring to the table holistic solutions. And the last thing that's in our purview is more like automation, right? But it has to be the right automation. It can't be automation for automation's sake. So I got pushback from my team and I said, hey, here are all these data sets. Can you please put them all in one place? And I need it to look like this. And they're like, we don't have time. We have other priorities. So they asked me, think like a DTC, act like CPG. We have scale. Things are slow, right? So they asked me to put together like a minimally viable product. So I worked with our strategy team and our BDS team who had access and they had time and capacity. And they built me an audience tool where we could use to have one source of truth. Okay, so there's two more points, and time check real quick. 2 more points. Sweet spot unlock. What do I mean by that? It's not this. Certainly not this, right? The beautiful combination of chocolate on chocolate on chocolate. Not that, but the sweet spot happens when you have a connected or a singular view of your consumer, and you know that you got it right. You know who your consumer is. Second one is you're bringing the business to the upfront. And I think we've talked about this yesterday of how sometimes the business team and the media team have always been separated, and we've lived that life with our MMMs, waiting 6 months for things to come back. We totally understand that, but because of my experience on the Walgreens sales team, I knew that we receive data on a daily basis on sales. So what if we targeted a certain area and we could measure it almost in real time? So we're constantly bringing business to the forefront. And the third piece is really we're finding the right partners that have the right technology so that we can target. So a couple examples, like so Easter was one of the longest Easter season this year, right? There's inventory that sits in the back room that has to be sold through, and people don't want to buy Easter candy, well, some people do, on April 22nd if Easter is on April 21st. So there's literally a countdown of how much or how long we have until we can sell through all the product and get it out the back room. Historically, we use linear TV, right, to target, and we still do, and that's important. But what about when we tap into our addressable partners who have that capability to hyper-target? So if we knew real-time how our sales are going, could we potentially push sales right? So we understood that zip code 17111 was down in sales and they may not make their number. Could we use our media budget and the technology to target to push sales through? So that's one case study, right? The second one is we started leaning into understanding our consumer, but then like pivoting. So if we had a real-time view of sales performance by consumer segment, I mean, we had one top line spend, and this doesn't happen necessarily in all walled gardens. This can happen mainly in addressable. But we said, okay, Almond Joy, this is just an example, not truly what we did. But we, in theory, could say, I want someone who is a woman who's 35 plus, but hey, we know that males could also purchase, so let's see how they're performing and add them in. And you know what, coconut and dark chocolate tends to skew to an older profile, but hey, let's bring in that younger profile and spend a certain % of our budget on that younger profile. So we were becoming smarter, but we were not sacrificing scale, right? So within these individual segments could be like micro targets, but it still ladders up to a bigger budget and a bigger size, because again, we're talking billions of dollars, we're talking billions of transactions. Okay, lastly, how do I evangelize this? Everyone tends to say, hey, we want to target everyone with a mouth because we have 98% household penetration. And when I say we, I mean the category, because we take ownership of the category. And I'm like, okay, how do I change this mentality? Again, there are 17 brands and I counted 39 priorities, which can translate into 39 different audiences, but we're a big company. I said, we got to sing from the same song sheet. What do I mean by that? I mean that if we're going to move many people, we need to have one singular view of the consumer. We need to come up with a cute name, a pithy name, right? A master audience. And there needs to be a framework that I need to train and coach everyone on, that no matter what platform you're in, this is what it looks like. It looks like this consumer, and you have to have these 3 fundamentals present in your audience. So I'm not giving you the farm here, but I'm giving you a framework. So that's what we did. And again, it actually worked out really well, because no matter, and these are not our exhaustive partners, it's just a high-level view, but no matter where you are, you should have, and no matter how many priorities. So you see Reese's there as an example. We just launched Reese's Lovers Cup, peanut butter lovers, chocolate lovers cup. No matter where you are, that might have a different audience, but it should be consistent all the way through. Now, we may change the aging and the sizing, but for the most part, candy is instinctive. So there are attributes that we're looking for when we're targeting that consumer. Okay? So I'm going to close it off. Principles. The first principle I would say is always, always, always look internally first. If you are a CPG, think like a DTC, act like a CPG. You have scale, you have the budget, but you need to always think, we've made investments, and somebody somewhere knows something that you don't know. So take a moment, assess the environment, write down what you don't know, and then think about who might know that or who can get you to the right person. That's literally what I did 2 years ago. The other thing is find one source of truth. Yes, you don't have first-party data, but you can think through what is your framework to have as one source of truth. Balance of granularity and scale. That is our advantage, right? You have the size, but understand that granularity is not always a bad thing. You need that depth of understanding so that you can tease apart the differences in your audience and then think about how do you go to market in an efficient way. Thirdly, the fourth is evangelize and synchronize. Like, it's not good for us to just have what do we call us? We're like a collective of experts. And some people call it like a source of excellence, depending on what environment you're in. It's not good just for the excellence to exist within your media group. You have to train and upskill your marketers and your cross-functionals. So I would say, think about how you can evangelize and synchronize. And I wish you the best of luck on this journey, because it's not easy, because things constantly change and evolve each and every month within media. So Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you, Ashlee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully that
Stay
was
right there. Stay right there. I'm sure there are questions. I'm sure there are questions. Questions for Ashlee, other than where we can give her our card to get the chocolate. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. We'll get to everybody. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, especially in like a older, very traditionally rooted company, like what were some of the politics you had to go through, and like how did you really get the buy-in to really, you know, blow things up and reorganize your current process?
Well, I would say that's a really, really great question. I think the organization already has this mindset. Like, we are not blind, which is why I love the company, is because we are not blind to our blind spots. And I think the organization, during the time when I took on my role, I was tapped on the shoulder. It wasn't like I applied for this role, like I was asked to be in the role. So the mindset was already there. I just had to identify who are the right people who would clear the pathway for me. So part of it is like assessing your stakeholders. I know this is above and beyond your current role, but if you want to be someone who instigates change within your organization, you have to have this mindset of, okay, what role does this stakeholder play? And then who do I have who understands the landscape and the environment within the organization, but then also has the respect? So if I go to this person with a problem or a team that, you know, I call out an issue, one, if they fight on my behalf, they have, and fight is the wrong word, but if they ask for permission on my behalf, they have the respect of the organization. And so it was just kind of like the perfect storm, the right time, the right place, and things evolved that way.
Jared May, Textile Fashion Group. So when you think about, you showed the slide with all of your different media partners for Reese's. How do you go about sharing those audiences and making sure that you have, you know, kind of a relative, like a holistic, you know, kind of approach there?
Right. So there's two steps that I didn't show, right? The first step is, one, you give it a name, right? You establish a framework and you give it a name. And that's your internal, I have to share with like the brand team, they have to feel comfortable with it, share with my media team, and then there's the way that we're structured within my media team. We have Melanie, who leads the addressable side. We also have a guy who leads our social side. First, make sure they're on board to that sheet. And then when I go to the partners, right, I'm not sharing their data, like I'm not sharing Facebook's data with someone else's, you know, that's just no-go. I'm sharing our data or a high-level view, the investments that Hershey made, right, from a selling standpoint, and I'm sharing them in that framework. They all get the same framework, no matter who they are.
That's a great presentation, Ashlee. Matt from Zaxxas, real quickly, you talk about think like a DTC and act like a CPG. Many of the DTC companies, I'm thinking of Bombas and Todd's, have sort of social connections to their brands, like buy a pair of socks, we'll donate a pair of socks. You, as part of Hershey, have this ingrained in the culture, and the fact that your founder has been sponsoring an orphanage for so long. Why haven't you promoted that or used that as a way maybe to even increase your first-party data? I would imagine my kids, if they knew that Hershey was sponsoring this and continues to sort of invest in this and invest in the future of these children, and they could somehow share some of their data in return for sort of buying more Reese's Peanut Butter Cups or Hershey Kisses, I think they would do that.
Yeah. I asked that same question 70 years ago when I interviewed for the Hershey company. And I think that there's just this aura of humility. I talked about in the beginning how it was long after he passed that we knew that the company actually is owned by the trust, and that that all of the funds or all the sales that we make go to Milton Hershey. Not necessarily all of them, but a portion of it, right? A healthy chunk. So I think that's just ingrained in our culture of humility. I'm not sure what the now next step is to share that, but anytime I have the opportunity, I want to share.
Sure. Good morning, Ashlee. Thank you for the presentation. Sean from Dish. You talked a lot about the path to consumer, but I'm interested to know, after the campaign execution on the return path data, what you receive back from your media partners, how do you harness that to inform packaging, promotion, distribution for the next round, and how do you continue to evolve that?
The feedback from the social part?
From the campaign. So all of the execution, any of the data that you get from media partners, how do you harness that to gauge success and then evolve not only the messaging and the execution, but also packaging everything that includes in the product?
So I think there's more work to be done on that front. Like all the pipes are not connected, right? Because the team that optimizes the packaging, the commercials, et cetera, is a different team from the media planning, strategy, and execution team, right? So, and we're just, once we get the information, we change our mix from that standpoint. I think we would need to some things would need to change for us to provide that feedback back to the separate parts within the organization, right? So it's hard. The answer is it's hard. That's our journey. That's the mindset that we're in, is taking ownership and have a holistic mindset to move forward.
Ashlee's going to lead the roundtable on this very topic at the end of the morning, so you can join her then to talk more. Ashlee, that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.